Jessica Thompson rubbed her tired eyes as the line of passengers slowly moved forward into the airplane. After 3 days of nonstop presentations and networking at the medical marketing conference in Boston, all she wanted was to get home to San Diego and fall into her own bed. The weight of her laptop bag dug into her shoulder, making her regret bringing so many materials. "Ma'am, your boarding pass, please." The gate agent's voice snapped Jessica back to reality. She handed over her phone with the digital ticket displayed. The agent nodded with a smile. "Seat 3A. Welcome aboard and enjoy your flight." Jessica walked down the jetway, grateful that her company had sprung for a first-class ticket. At least she could get some decent rest on the 6-hour flight. As a black woman who had worked her way up in the corporate world, Jessica never took these small luxuries for granted. 10 years ago, she had been flying economy and eating ramen noodles to make rent. The flight attendant at the door greeted her warmly. "Welcome aboard. First class is to your left." Jessica made her way to her window seat in the 3rd row. The first-class cabin smelled of leather and some light citrus cleaning product. She stowed her laptop bag under the seat in front of her, keeping out just her e-reader and a small bag of almonds. She had changed into comfortable clothes after her last presentation. Simple black leggings, white sneakers, and an oversized gray university hoodie from her alma mater. Not her usual business attire, but perfect for a long flight. As she settled into the wide leather seat, Jessica felt some of the tension leaving her shoulders. She plugged in her phone to charge and glanced at the messages from her team back at the office. The conference had gone well. Her presentation on digital marketing strategies for healthcare providers had been packed, with standing room only. Several potential clients had approached her afterward, and her boss had already sent a congratulatory email. "Would you like a pre-departure beverage?" A flight attendant appeared beside her with a tray. "Just water, please," Jessica replied, accepting the glass. She took a long sip, closed her eyes, and leaned back in her seat. For the next 6 hours, no one needed anything from her. No presentations, no networking, no putting on her professional face. Just quiet and rest. Passengers continued to board, filing past her to the economy section. Jessica kept her eyes closed, trying to block out the noise. She was almost drifting off when a sharp voice cut through her peace. "Excuse me, I believe you're in my seat." Jessica opened her eyes to see a middle-aged white woman with perfectly highlighted blonde hair standing over her. The woman wore designer jeans, an expensive-looking cream sweater, and had a tennis bracelet sparkling on her wrist. Her lips were pressed into a thin line as she stared down at Jessica. "I'm sorry?" Jessica said, confused. The woman, Brenda Whitfield, though Jessica didn't know her name yet, held out her boarding pass. "This is seat 3A, first class. Window seat." Jessica reached for her phone and pulled up her own boarding pass. "My ticket also says 3A. She held it up to show the woman. Brenda barely glanced at it before shaking her head. "There must be some mistake. This is my seat. I always get this seat when we fly cross-country." Jessica noticed several other passengers glancing their way. A businessman across the aisle looked up from his newspaper, frowning slightly. "I'm happy to call a flight attendant to sort this out," Jessica offered calmly, despite the irritation building inside her. This was not what she needed after her exhausting trip. "Yes, let's do that," Brenda said, her voice carrying through the cabin. She raised her hand to flag down a passing flight attendant. "Excuse me, we have a seating issue here." The flight attendant, whose name tag read Michael, approached with a professional smile. "How can I help?" "This young woman is in my seat," Brenda said firmly, emphasizing the word my as she gestured toward Jessica. "I have ticket 3A, first class." Michael turned to Jessica. "May I see your boarding pass as well, ma'am?" Jessica showed him her phone. Michael looked at both tickets carefully, then checked something on his tablet. "Ms. Thompson is in the correct seat," he confirmed, looking at Brenda. "Perhaps there's a mix-up with your ticket. Can I double-check your reservation details?" Brenda's face tightened as she looked again at her boarding pass. "This says 3A, I don't understand." "Let me see," Michael said gently, taking her paper ticket. He studied it for a moment. Your ticket is for tomorrow's flight, Ms. Whitfield, not today's." A flash of confusion crossed Brenda's face, quickly replaced by stubborn certainty. "That's impossible. My husband made these reservations weeks ago. We're flying home today, not tomorrow." More passengers were watching now. Jessica felt uncomfortable under their stares but kept her expression neutral. She'd dealt with difficult people throughout her career. This was nothing new. Perhaps your husband is on a different flight, Michael suggested. I can check if— No, Brenda cut him off. We're traveling together. He's boarding shortly. He had to take a call. She turned back to Jessica, eyes narrowing slightly. There must be some computer error. These seats are quite expensive. The implication hung in the air. Jessica felt a familiar twist in her stomach, the one that came whenever someone suggested, subtly or not, that she didn't belong in certain spaces. My company purchased this ticket for me, Jessica explained, keeping her voice level. I'm returning from a business conference. Brenda looked Jessica up and down, taking in her casual clothes and natural hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Well, there's clearly been a mistake somewhere. She turned back to Michael. Can't you find her another seat? Maybe an economy? I'm sure there must be something available. Michael's smile became more fixed. Ms. Whitfield, as I explained, Ms. Thompson is in her assigned seat. Let me check what seat you actually have for today's flight. As he tapped on his tablet, Brenda wasn't ready to give up. I fly this road every month. The staff all know me. I always sit in 3A. Jessica remained silent, though her heart was beating faster now. She was tired of these moments. Tired of having to prove she belonged in spaces like first-class executive meetings or upscale neighborhoods. But she had learned long ago that losing her cool only reinforced stereotypes. So she sat straight, maintained eye contact, and waited. I'd like to speak to the captain about this, Brenda declared, loud enough that most of the first-class cabin could hear her. This is unacceptable. An older gentleman a few rows back looked up from his book. A younger woman across the aisle was openly staring now, discomfort written across her face. Jessica could feel her cheeks growing warm despite her best efforts to stay composed. Michael kept his professional demeanor. The captain is preparing for our departure, Ms. Whitfield, but I can call my supervisor if you'd like. Yes, do that, Brenda said firmly. And check whether my husband has boarded yet. Dr. William Whitfield. He'll straighten this out. As Michael stepped away to use the cabin phone, Jessica pulled out her e-reader, pretending to read while trying to ignore the stares. She had been looking forward to this quiet time to decompress. Now all she felt was exposed and exhausted in a whole new way. Here's what's going to happen, Brenda said, leaning closer to Jessica and lowering her voice. When they realize who my husband is, they'll find you another seat. William is a platinum member and knows the airline management personally. Jessica met her gaze steadily. I'm in my correct seat, Ms. Whitfield. I'm not moving unless the airline tells me I need to. Brenda's eyes widened slightly, perhaps surprised by Jessica's quiet confidence. Before she could respond, Michael returned with another flight attendant. Ms. Whitfield, I've checked our system, Michael said. It appears you and your husband are both booked on tomorrow's flight. However, Dr. Whitfield did change his reservation to today's flight, but yours remained for tomorrow. That's ridiculous, Brenda snapped. We always travel together. Check again. I've confirmed it twice, Michael said firmly. Your husband is on today's flight in seat 5C, but your reservation is for tomorrow. We can try to accommodate you on today's flight, but seat 3A belongs to Ms. Thompson. Brenda opened her mouth to argue further when a distinguished-looking older man with silver hair and glasses appeared in the aisle. He wore a tailored navy suit that spoke of quiet wealth, and his expression was one of growing concern. Brenda? What's going on? I could hear you from the back of the boarding line, he said, his voice carrying a hint of embarrassment. Jessica watched as Brenda turned to the man with relief. William, thank goodness. There's some confusion about our seats. They're trying to tell me I'm booked for tomorrow's flight, and this woman is in my usual seat. Dr. Whitfield glanced from his wife to Jessica, then to the flight attendants. Something shifted in his expression, a flash of recognition that Jessica couldn't quite interpret. Brenda, he said slowly, I changed my flight to today because of the emergency surgery this morning. Remember? You decided to stay an extra day for your spa appointment. Your flight is tomorrow. The color drained from Brenda's face as the truth sank in. Around them, passengers quickly looked away, suddenly finding their books and phones fascinating. The silence in the first-class cabin was deafening. Dr. Whitfield placed a gentle hand on his wife's shoulder. Let me see your boarding pass, he said quietly. Brenda fumbled in her purse, her fingers trembling slightly as she handed over the ticket. Dr. Whitfield glanced at it and sighed. This is for tomorrow's flight, dear, just as they said. He looked up at the flight attendants. I apologize for the confusion. Is there any possibility my wife could get on this flight? I'd be happy to pay for an additional ticket. Michael nodded. Let me check availability. He stepped away again, leaving an uncomfortable silence in his wake. Brenda stood frozen in the aisle, her face flushed with embarrassment. The other first-class passengers were pointedly avoiding looking at her now, but Jessica could feel the tension in the cabin. Dr. Whitfield turned to Jessica with an apologetic smile. I'm very sorry for the misunderstanding, Ms. Thompson, Jessica supplied. Jessica Thompson. A flicker of recognition crossed Dr. Whitfield's face. Thompson? From All Health Marketing? Jessica nodded, surprised. Yes, that's right. I thought you looked familiar, Dr. Whitfield said, his smile warming. I attended your presentation yesterday at the Boston Medical Conference. Digital strategies for patient engagement in the post-pandemic era, wasn't it? Absolutely brilliant work. Jessica blinked in surprise. Thank you, Dr. Whitfield. I'm glad you found it helpful. Brenda's head snapped up, her eyes darting between her husband and Jessica. You know each other? Not personally, Dr. Whitfield explained. But Ms. Thompson was one of the keynote speakers at the conference I've been attending. The one I told you about over breakfast yesterday. Jessica noticed Brenda's expression shift from confusion to dawning horror as the pieces fell into place. Not only had she made a scene over a mistake that was entirely her own, but she'd done so with someone her husband professionally admired. Michael returned with another flight attendant, a woman whose name tag read Diana. Good news, Ms. Whitfield, Diana said. We do have a seat available in first class. It's not next to your husband, I'm afraid. It's in row 7. But we can accommodate you on today's flight. That's very kind of you, Dr. Whitfield said before Brenda could respond. We appreciate it, Diana smiled. We'll need to process the ticket purchase before takeoff. If you'll come with me to the front galley, we can take care of that now. Brenda seemed to have lost her earlier confidence. She nodded mutely and followed Diana toward the front of the plane, not meeting anyone's eyes. Dr. Whitfield lingered for a moment. Ms. Thompson, please accept my apologies again for the disruption. My wife sometimes jumps to conclusions before checking the facts. The gentle rebuke in his voice made it clear he wasn't just talking about the date on the ticket. Jessica appreciated his awareness of what had really happened, the assumptions Brenda had made about whether Jessica belonged in first class. No harm done, Jessica said, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. Dr. Whitfield nodded, seeming to understand what went unsaid. Enjoy your flight, and thank you again for your insights at the conference. Our hospital system is implementing several of your recommendations already. I'm glad to hear that, Jessica replied. Safe travels, Dr. Whitfield. As he made his way to his own seat, Jessica felt the tension in her shoulders slowly release. She took a deep breath and returned to her e-reader. Though the words on the screen didn't immediately register, the incident had left her feeling drained in a way that was all too familiar. A flight attendant, not Michael or Diana, but a younger woman with a kind smile, stopped by her seat. Ms. Thompson, can I get you anything before takeoff? Perhaps something stronger than water? Jessica considered for a moment. A glass of white wine would be nice, thank you. Coming right up, the attendant said with a sympathetic smile that told Jessica she'd witnessed the whole scene. As the flight attendant walked away, the businessman seated across the aisle leaned slightly toward Jessica. That was handled with impressive grace, he said quietly. Not sure I would have been as patient. Jessica gave him a small smile. Years of practice in corporate America. He nodded knowingly. Ain't that the truth? He extended his hand. Thomas Chen, I work in pharmaceutical sales. Jessica Thompson. Marketing executive, Thomas grinned. I know, I was at your presentation too. Got your business card and everything. Was planning to email you next week about some potential projects. Jessica laughed, feeling some of the heaviness lift. Well, this is certainly a memorable way to follow up. The airline industry, bringing strangers together in uncomfortable situations since 1914, Thomas joked. The flight attendant returned with Jessica's wine. Here you go. We'll be taking off in about 15 minutes. Thank you, Jessica said, accepting the glass gratefully. At the front of the cabin, Brenda was completing her ticket purchase, her body language stiff and uncomfortable. Dr. Whitfield stood beside her, murmuring something in her ear that made her shoulders slump slightly. Jessica turned away, not wanting to stare. She took a sip of her wine and tried to push the incident from her mind. This was supposed to be her time to relax before diving back into work tomorrow. She refused to let Brenda Whitfield's assumptions ruin that. More passengers filed past to economy, the plane gradually filling. Jessica checked her emails one last time before she'd need to switch her phone to airplane mode. A message from her assistant caught her eye. A potential new client had reached out after her presentation, wanting to schedule a meeting next week. Good news, at least. The captain's voice came over the intercom, welcoming everyone aboard and announcing an on-time departure. Flight attendants began their final preparations, checking seatbelts and stowed luggage. Jessica noticed Brenda making her way back down the aisle to her assigned seat in row 7. Their eyes met briefly, but Brenda quickly looked away, her cheeks coloring again. Dr. Whitfield followed a few steps behind, giving Jessica a small nod as he passed. "Ladies and gentlemen, please direct your attention to the flight attendants for important safety information," the captain announced. As the safety demonstration began, Jessica tried to focus on the familiar instructions, but her mind kept returning to the interaction. It wasn't the first time something like this had happened, and it probably wouldn't be the last. Each incident brought back memories of others. The security guard who had followed her around an upscale boutique, the host who had assumed she was waiting for takeout rather than dining in, the colleague who had mistaken her for administrative staff rather than a fellow executive. The plane began to taxi, and Jessica looked out the window at the airport slowly moving past. She had learned to pick her battles over the years, to recognize when speaking up would make a difference and when it would only exhaust her further. Today, Dr. Whitfield's recognition had done some of that work for her. There was a small satisfaction in that, though it didn't erase the initial sting. The aircraft paused at the runway, engines growing louder as they prepared for takeoff. Jessica finished her wine and handed the empty glass to a passing flight attendant. She closed her eyes as the plane accelerated down the runway, the familiar pressure pushing her back into her seat. Maybe she would write about this someday. Add it to the collection of stories she sometimes shared when mentoring younger Black women entering the corporate world. Not to discourage them, but to prepare them, and to show them that surviving these moments was its own kind of strength. The plane lifted off, the ground falling away beneath them. Jessica felt the familiar flutter in her stomach that came with takeoff, a mixture of anxiety and excitement. No matter how often she flew, that sensation never quite went away. As they climbed through the clouds, Jessica's phone buzzed with a text message that had been waiting to deliver, her roommate confirming she'd fed Jessica's cat and asking when her flight would land. The simple, normal question made Jessica smile. In a few hours, she'd be home, back to her regular life where she didn't have to justify her presence to strangers. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Around her, passengers began to settle in for the long flight, reclining seats, opening laptops, putting on headphones. The normal rhythm of air travel resumed as if the earlier scene had never happened. Michael appeared beside Jessica's seat. "Another glass of wine, Miss Thompson? Or perhaps something to eat? We'll be serving lunch in about an hour, but I can bring you some snacks now if you'd like." "I'm fine for now, thank you," Jessica replied, "but I'll take a bottle of water if you have one." "Of course." He returned moments later with the water. "Just press the call button if you need anything else, and I'm sorry about earlier." Jessica appreciated the acknowledgement. "Not your fault at all. You handled it professionally." Michael nodded gratefully and moved on to the next passenger. Jessica took a sip of water and reopened her e-reader, determined to enjoy at least some of the quiet time she'd been looking forward to. But as she tried to focus on her novel, she couldn't help wondering what Brenda was thinking now, 7 rows behind her. Was she embarrassed, regretful, or was she justifying her behavior to herself, finding ways to make Jessica the villain in the story she would tell later? Jessica shook her head slightly, pushing those thoughts away. It didn't matter. What mattered was that she had maintained her dignity and her seat. Sometimes that small victory was enough. The flight had been in the air for about 40 minutes when Jessica finally managed to lose herself in her novel. It was a thriller she'd been trying to finish for weeks, but work had kept getting in the way. Now 30,000 feet above the ground, she was finally able to focus on the story. A gentle tap on her shoulder pulled her back to reality. She looked up to find Dr. Whitfield standing in the aisle beside her seat. Ms. Thompson, I apologize for disturbing you, he said, his voice low. I wonder if I might have a word. Jessica slipped her bookmark into place and set the e-reader aside. Of course, Dr. Whitfield. He gestured to the empty seat beside her. May I? Jessica nodded, and Dr. Whitfield settled into the seat, turning slightly to face her. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes and the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. He had kind eyes behind his glasses, the sort of doctor you'd want delivering difficult news. I wanted to apologize again for my wife's behavior, he said, his hands folded in his lap. It was inexcusable. As I said before, it's not your responsibility to apologize for her, Jessica replied. Dr. Whitfield sighed. Perhaps not, but I feel I should explain a bit if you'll allow me. Jessica wasn't sure she wanted to hear excuses for Brenda's behavior, but she nodded anyway. Go ahead. Brenda comes from, well, a different world than the one I've tried to build for us, he began. Her family had certain views that I've spent 20 years trying to help her unlearn. Jessica understood immediately what he was trying to say. Dr. Whitfield, you don't have to. Please call me William, he interrupted gently. And I know I don't have to explain. But I want to. Not to excuse what happened, but to give it context. Jessica nodded. Though she wasn't entirely comfortable with the direction of the conversation, she'd spent enough of her life being asked to understand and forgive people's contexts. Brenda grew up in a small town with very little diversity, William continued. Her parents had outdated views, to put it politely. When I met her, she was just beginning to question those views, which is partly why I fell in love with her. I saw someone who had the capacity to grow beyond her upbringing. He paused, looking down at his hands, and she has grown in many ways. But sometimes, like today, I'm reminded that we still have work to do. Jessica wasn't sure what to say. It wasn't her job to absolve this man's guilt or validate his choice of partner, but there was something genuine in his regret that made her respond. We all have blind spots, Dr. Whitfield. William. The important thing is what we do when they're pointed out to us. William nodded. Exactly. And please understand, when I recognized you from the conference, it wasn't just about making Brenda realize her mistake about the ticket. I wanted her to see you as I had seen you, as a brilliant professional whose insights had the entire audience hanging on every word. Jessica felt a flush of pride at the compliment, though she tried not to show it. Thank you. That's kind of you to say. It's not kindness, it's accuracy, William said firmly. Your presentation was the highlight of the conference for me. I've been in healthcare for 30 years, and the industry desperately needs fresh perspectives like yours. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. I'm the chief of cardiology at Pacific West Medical Center. We're looking to revamp our entire patient engagement strategy. I'd been planning to contact your firm anyway, but meeting you like this seems like serendipity, despite the uncomfortable circumstances. Jessica accepted the card, studying it for a moment. Pacific West was one of the largest hospital systems on the West Coast. A client like that would be a significant win for her team. I'd be happy to set up a meeting next week to discuss how we might work together, she said, slipping the card into her e-reader case. William smiled. Excellent. I'll have my assistant reach out to yours. There was a brief pause, and Jessica sensed there was something more he wanted to say. There's one other thing, William said, confirming her suspicion. I know my wife should be the one saying this, but I'm not sure her pride will allow it yet. She feels terrible about what happened. Jessica kept her expression neutral. I appreciate you saying that. The thing is, William continued, Brenda has never been good at admitting when she's wrong. It comes from her father, he was the same way. But I know she's sitting back there in row 7, replaying the whole incident and feeling ashamed. Jessica wasn't sure why he was telling her this. Was he expecting her to go back and comfort Brenda? To tell her it was okay? As if reading her thoughts, William shook his head. I'm not asking you to do anything. You don't owe her any comfort or forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that your dignity in that moment made an impact. Sometimes that's how change happens. Not through arguments or education, but through encounters that force people to see themselves clearly. Jessica thought about that for a moment. She'd had many such encounters over the years, but rarely got to see if they made any difference. Most of the time, she walked away and never saw those people again. I hope you're right, she said finally. For both your sakes, William nodded. Well, I should get back to my seat. Thank you for hearing me out. He stood straightening his jacket. And truly, your presentation was remarkable. I took 3 pages of notes. As he walked back to his seat, Jessica felt a mix of emotions. There was satisfaction in the professional recognition, but also a weariness that came from yet another interaction where race had been the unspoken subtext. Even in William's apology and praise, it hovered in the background, the implication that her excellence was somehow more noteworthy because of who she was. The flight attendants began preparing the cabin for meal service. Jessica put away her e-reader and lowered her tray table. Across the aisle, Thomas gave her a curious look. "Everything okay?" he asked. Jessica nodded. "Fine, just a follow-up apology." Thomas raised his eyebrows. "From the husband? That's something, at least. And a potential business opportunity," Jessica added, tapping her e-reader case where she'd stored the card. Thomas grinned. "See? The universe works in mysterious ways. Turn a Karen encounter into a client." Jessica laughed despite herself. The term Karen had become so ubiquitous that it had lost some of its impact. But it certainly fit Brenda Whitfield. "I'll wait until the contract is signed before I count that as a win," she said. The meal service began, and Jessica was grateful for the distraction. The flight attendants moved efficiently through the cabin, distributing hot towels and taking drink orders for lunch. Jessica requested a glass of iced tea and settled back to enjoy the small luxury of first class. As she ate her meal, a surprisingly decent chicken dish with roasted vegetables. She found herself wondering what would happen when they landed. Would Brenda avoid eye contact as they deplaned? Would there be another awkward encounter at baggage claim? Or would 6 hours of sitting with her embarrassment lead Brenda to offer her own apology? Jessica wasn't counting on the latter. In her experience, people like Brenda rarely acknowledge their behavior directly. They might feel momentary shame, but it was easier to file the incident away and move on rather than confront what it revealed about themselves. The meal trays were collected, and Jessica declined coffee in favor of trying to get some work done. She pulled out her laptop and began reviewing emails, making notes on follow-ups needed when she returned to the office. Work was familiar territory, a space where she knew her value and didn't have to justify her presence. About halfway through the flight, Jessica got up to stretch her legs and use the restroom. As she walked back to her seat, she had to pass row 5 where William was sitting. He glanced up from his medical journal and gave her a small nod, which she returned a few steps further, and she was passing row 7. She kept her eyes forward, not wanting to make eye contact with Brenda, but she could feel the woman's gaze on her as she walked by. "Excuse me," a quiet voice said. Jessica paused, turning to find Brenda looking up at her, her expression uncertain. "Yes," Jessica said, keeping her voice neutral. Brenda seemed to struggle with what to say next. I wanted to say I'm sorry. About before. I made a mistake." The words sounded stiff, rehearsed, but there was something genuine in Brenda's discomfort. This wasn't easy for her. "Thank you for saying that," Jessica replied simply. "I appreciate the apology." She could have left it there, continued back to her seat. But something made her add, "It takes courage to admit when we're wrong." Brenda looked surprised at the small gesture of grace. "My husband says you're some kind of marketing genius," she said, as if trying to find safer conversational ground. Jessica smiled slightly. "I don't know about genius, but I'm good at what I do." "He never gets this excited about conference speakers," Brenda said. "He must have mentioned your presentation 3 times over breakfast yesterday." "That's very flattering," Jessica said. She noticed other passengers starting to look their way and was aware of blocking the aisle. "I should get back to my seat." Brenda nodded quickly. "Of course. I just wanted to—" "Well, you know." "I do," Jessica said. "Thank you." As she returned to her seat, Jessica felt lighter somehow. Not because Brenda's apology erased what had happened, but because it acknowledged it. So many similar incidents in her life had gone unacknowledged, left to fester in her memory while the person responsible walked away oblivious. Small steps, she thought as she settled back into her seat. The world changed through small steps and uncomfortable conversations. She reopened her laptop, but instead of returning to her emails, she found herself opening a blank document. For a moment, she stared at the cursor blinking on the empty page. Then she began to type, "Notes for mentoring session, navigating uncomfortable encounters in professional spaces. Maybe something good could come from this after all." The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing they were beginning their descent into San Diego. Jessica saved her document and closed her laptop, tucking it away in her bag. She'd spent the last 2 hours alternating between work and jotting down thoughts for the mentoring program she ran for young professionals of color. Today's experience had given her plenty of material. Thomas, who had been dozing across the aisle, straightened in his seat at the announcement. "Home sweet home," he said, stretching his arms above his head. "You live in San Diego?" Jessica nodded. "For about 6 years now, you?" "Born and raised," Thomas replied. "North County near Encinitas." "You?" "Downtown. I like being able to walk to restaurants and shops. Smart, avoiding our terrible traffic." Thomas grinned. "So Pacific West Medical, huh? That would be a big account." Jessica raised an eyebrow. "You were eavesdropping?" Thomas had the good grace to look slightly embarrassed. "Not intentionally. First class isn't exactly private." He lowered his voice. "Plus, I was curious about what Dr. Whitfield had to say." "Professional curiosity or personal?" Jessica asked, amused despite herself. "Both," Thomas admitted. "I've pitched to Pacific West 3 times in the past year. They're notoriously hard to get in with. If Dr. Whitfield is personally recruiting you, that's impressive." "We'll see if anything comes of it," Jessica said, though privately she was already thinking about which team members she'd assign to the account. The healthcare industry can be traditional in its approach to marketing. "That's one way to put it," Thomas agreed. "Dinosaurs is another. They need fresh blood like you to shake things up." The plane descended through clouds, and the familiar landscape of San Diego came into view. The blue bay, the downtown skyline, the bridges connecting the peninsula to the mainland. Jessica always felt a sense of homecoming when she saw this view, even though she'd grown up on the East Coast. San Diego had become home more quickly than she'd expected when she moved here for the job. As the plane touched down with a slight bounce, passengers around them began the familiar routine of gathering belongings despite the seatbelt sign still being illuminated. Jessica stayed put, in no rush to join the inevitable crush in the aisle. "Here's my card," Thomas said, passing a business card across the aisle. "If you ever want to compare notes on the healthcare industry, or just grab a coffee, give me a call. My company might have some projects that would align with your expertise." Jessica took the card, noticing the logo of a major pharmaceutical company. "Thanks, I might take you up on that." She handed him one of her own cards in return. Always good to expand the network. The seatbelt sign dinged off and passengers immediately stood, reaching for overhead bins. Jessica remained seated, knowing from experience that rushing wouldn't get her off the plane any faster. Thomas stood but seemed in no hurry either, casually retrieving his laptop bag from under the seat. "Good luck with the Pacific West opportunity," he said, "and with the rest of your day." "It's been a pleasure meeting you, Jessica, despite the circumstances." "Likewise," she replied. "Safe travels, Thomas." As he joined the line shuffling toward the exit, Jessica checked her phone for messages. A text from her roommate confirmed that Jessica's cat was fine but missing her. Another from her sister asked how the conference went. She'd respond to both once she was in the terminal. When the aisle had cleared somewhat, Jessica stood and gathered her belongings. As she made her way toward the front of the plane, she noticed William and Brenda standing in the jetway just beyond the aircraft door, seemingly waiting for something. Jessica felt a momentary awkwardness. Would they try to speak with her again? She nodded politely as she passed them, intending to continue on, but William spoke up. "Miss Thompson, Jessica, do you have ground transportation arranged?" Jessica paused. "I was going to take a ride share. Why?" "We have a car service picking us up," William explained. "We'd be happy to drop you somewhere if you're headed into the city." Jessica hesitated, surprised by the offer. Beside William, Brenda stood with her handbag clutched in front of her, her expression difficult to read. "That's very kind," Jessica said carefully, "but I wouldn't want to inconvenience you." "It's no inconvenience at all," William insisted. "Actually, it would give us a chance to continue our conversation about potential collaboration." Jessica considered the offer. On one hand, the thought of sharing a car with Brenda after their earlier interaction wasn't particularly appealing. On the other, the networking opportunity with William could be valuable. Plus, she was curious about how Brenda would behave now. "If you're sure it's not an imposition, that would be great," she said finally. "Thank you," William smiled. "Excellent. Our driver should be waiting at passenger pickup." shall we?" The three of them walked through the terminal together, an unlikely trio. Jessica noticed Brenda keeping slightly behind William, as if using him as a buffer. They collected their checked luggage, Jessica's single black suitcase, William's garment bag, and Brenda's matching set of designer luggage, and made their way outside to the pickup area. A black SUV was waiting at the curb, a driver in a suit holding a sign with Dr. and Mrs. Whitfield printed on it. The driver quickly loaded their luggage into the back, while William spoke to him briefly, presumably giving him Jessica's address as well. "Please, after you," William said, gesturing for Jessica to enter the vehicle first. Jessica climbed in, taking a seat facing forward. William sat beside her while Brenda took the seat across from them, facing backward. The interior was spacious and smelled of leather and some subtle air freshener. Soft classical music played at a low volume. "Comfortable?" William asked as the driver pulled away from the curb. "Very," Jessica replied. "This is much nicer than the rideshare I had planned." "We keep a car service on retainer," William explained. "It makes travel a bit less stressful." There was an awkward pause. Brenda was looking out the window, seemingly determined to avoid eye contact. Jessica wondered if she was regretting her husband's invitation. "So," William said, breaking the silence, "I was thinking we could set up a meeting next week with our marketing team. I'd like you to present some of the ideas from your conference talk, particularly the patient engagement framework you outlined." "I'd be happy to," Jessica said, slipping into professional mode. "I could bring along our healthcare team lead as well. He has extensive experience with hospital systems similar to yours." "Perfect," William nodded. "Monday or Tuesday would work best for me." "Tuesday morning would be ideal," Jessica replied. "I'll need tomorrow to catch up at the office after being away." As they discussed logistics, Jessica noticed Brenda watching them, her expression difficult to read. When there was a lull in the conversation, Brenda surprised both of them by speaking up. "You must travel a lot for your work," she said to Jessica, her voice careful, as if testing waters. Jessica nodded. "About once or twice a month for conferences or client meetings. More during busy seasons." "That must be exhausting," Brenda commented. "It can be," Jessica admitted. "But I enjoy the variety. Each client has unique challenges." Brenda nodded, then hesitated before adding, "I used to work in real estate before I married William. I remember the constant travel and client meetings." Jessica hadn't expected this personal disclosure. "Real estate? That's interesting." "What area?" "Commercial properties, mainly office buildings in Boston," Brenda said. "Nothing as sophisticated as what you do, but I enjoyed the work." "Why did you stop?" Jessica asked, genuinely curious now. Brenda glanced at William. "When we got married, William's practice was taking off, and there were a lot of social obligations. Charity boards, hospital functions. It seemed like the right time to transition." There was something in Brenda's tone, a slight note of regret perhaps, that caught Jessica's attention. She wondered if Brenda missed having a career of her own, an identity separate from being Dr. Whitfield's wife. "Do you ever think about going back?" Jessica asked. Brenda looked surprised by the question. I haven't really considered it. It's been 15 years. The industry has changed a lot, I'm sure," Jessica said, "but your experience would still be valuable. Commercial real estate always needs people who understand client relationships." William was watching this exchange with interest. "You know, Brenda, Jessica makes a good point. You were excellent at your job. Remember how your firm kept trying to lure you back that first year after you left?" Brenda seemed flustered by the turn in conversation. "That was a long time ago. Everything's digital now. I wouldn't know where to begin." "The fundamentals of good client service never change," Jessica said. "The tools evolve, but relationships are still the foundation." The car slowed, turning onto Jessica's street. She was surprised to realize they'd arrived at her building already. The conversation had made the ride seem shorter. "This is me," she said as the driver pulled up to the curb. "Thank you again for the ride." "The pleasure was ours," William replied. "I'll have my assistant contact yours tomorrow about Tuesday's meeting." The driver came around to open Jessica's door and retrieve her luggage from the trunk. As Jessica prepared to exit, Brenda leaned forward slightly. "Jessica," she said, her voice lower now, "thank you for being kind. After how I behaved, you had every right not to be." The sincerity in Brenda's voice was unexpected. Jessica smiled slightly. Sometimes we all need a little grace when we make mistakes. Brenda nodded, looking relieved. Good luck with your meeting on Tuesday. I have a feeling William's team is going to be very impressed. I hope so, Jessica replied. Then, on impulse, she added, and if you ever decide to explore getting back into real estate, I know some excellent firms in the area. The market here is very different from Boston. Brenda looked surprised, but a small smile appeared. I might take you up on that. Jessica said her final goodbyes and stepped out of the car. As she wheeled her suitcase toward her building entrance, she heard the car pull away behind her. What a strange day it had been. From confrontation to potential collaboration, from tension to something almost like connection. Her phone buzzed with a notification. Her sister, checking if she'd landed safely. Jessica smiled and typed a quick reply. Landed safe. You won't believe the day I've had. Call you tonight. She looked back once as the black SUV disappeared around a corner. She had a feeling Tuesday's meeting would be very interesting indeed. Tuesday morning arrived with San Diego's characteristic perfect weather. Clear blue skies, mild temperatures, and a gentle breeze coming in from the bay. Jessica stood in front of her closet, considering her options for the meeting at Pacific West Medical Center. She finally settled on a tailored navy pantsuit with a subtle pinstripe, paired with a cream blouse and her favorite statement, necklace, a gift from her mother when Jessica landed her first executive position. Power outfit for a power meeting, she murmured to herself as she put the finishing touches on her makeup. Her cat Fitzgerald watched lazily from her bed, unimpressed by her preparations. Jessica's phone buzzed with a text from Ryan, her healthcare team lead who would be joining her for the meeting. Parking at Pacific West is a nightmare. Want me to pick you up? Yes, please. I'd me fintin, she texted back. See you then, came the reply. Jessica had spent Monday briefing her team about the potential new client. Everyone was excited about the possibility of adding such a prestigious hospital system to their portfolio. She'd prepared a tailored presentation based on her conference talk, but expanded to address the specific challenges Dr. Whitfield had mentioned during their conversation on the plane. At precisely 8:15, Ryan texted that he was downstairs. Jessica grabbed her portfolio and laptop bag, gave Fitzgerald a quick scratch behind the ears and headed out. Morning, boss, Ryan said cheerfully as she slid into the passenger seat of his Tesla. At 32, Ryan was 5 years younger than Jessica, but had quickly proven himself invaluable since joining the company 2 years ago. With his background in both healthcare administration and digital marketing, he brought a unique perspective to their projects. Ready for this? Jessica asked as they pulled into traffic. Born ready, Ryan replied with his characteristic confidence. I did some research on Dr. Whitfield yesterday. The man's a legend in cardiology. Published in all the top journals, pioneered several minimally invasive procedures. Pacific West's cardiac unit is ranked 3rd in the nation largely because of him. Good to know, Jessica said, impressed by Ryan's thoroughness. You didn't happen to research his wife too, did you? Ryan gave her a curious look. No, should I have? Jessica smiled slightly. No, just curious. Let's focus on the business aspects for now. They arrived at Pacific West's impressive glass and steel building with 15 minutes to spare. The modern facility gleamed in the morning sunlight, a stark contrast to the older hospitals Jessica had grown up seeing on the East Coast. After checking in at reception, they were directed to a conference room on the 8th floor, the executive level. The room had floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city and the ocean beyond. Not bad, Ryan whispered as they set up their presentation. Beats the windowless basement meeting rooms at County General. Jessica was connecting her laptop to the projector when the door opened. Dr. Whitfield entered, followed by 3 people Jessica assumed were part of his team. He smiled warmly when he saw her. Ms. Thompson, good morning, he said, extending his hand. Wonderful to see you again. I hope you've recovered from your travels. Completely, thank you, Jessica replied, shaking his hand. And please call me Jessica. This is Ryan Chen, our healthcare team lead. As introductions were made all around, Jessica noticed that Dr. Whitfield's colleagues, the chief of marketing, the patient experience director, and the digital strategy manager, all seemed deferential to him. It was clear who the decision-maker was in this group. Shall we begin? Dr. Whitfield suggested once everyone was seated. I've told my team about your impressive work, Jessica. but I think they'd benefit from hearing directly from you." Jessica launched into her presentation confidently. She'd given variations of this talk dozens of times, but she'd customized it substantially for Pacific West, incorporating specific challenges Dr. Whitfield had mentioned and research she'd done on their current digital presence. Ryan chimed in at key points, providing technical details and implementation strategies. The Pacific West team was engaged, asking thoughtful questions and taking notes. Dr. Whitfield sat back, watching both his team and Jessica with evident approval. By the halfway point, Jessica could tell they were making a positive impression. During a short break while Ryan was demonstrating their analytics dashboard to the digital strategy manager, Dr. Whitfield approached Jessica. "This is going exceptionally well," he said quietly. "My team is impressed and they're not easily impressed." "I'm glad to hear that," Jessica replied. "Your colleagues ask great questions. It's clear they care deeply about patient experiences." Dr. Whitfield nodded. "They do. That's why I brought them in. I knew they'd appreciate your approach." He hesitated, then added, "By the way, Brenda mentioned your conversation in the car, about her possibly returning to real estate." Jessica raised her eyebrows, surprised. "Oh? She's actually looking into courses to update her skills," he said, sounding both surprised and pleased. "I haven't seen her this energized about something in years. Whatever you said made an impact." "I just recognized another professional," Jessica said simply. "Sometimes we need someone outside our usual circle to remind us of possibilities we've forgotten." Dr. Whitfield studied her for a moment. "You have remarkable insight, Jessica. That's evident in your work, but it extends beyond that." Before Jessica could respond, the door to the conference room opened unexpectedly. To her absolute surprise, Brenda Whitfield walked in, carrying a tray with coffee and pastries. "I thought everyone might need refreshments," Brenda announced, setting the tray on the side table. She was dressed in a stylish but conservative outfit, quite different from the casual designer clothes she'd worn on the plane. Dr. Whitfield looked as surprised as Jessica felt. "Brenda, I didn't know you were coming in today." "I had a meeting with Human Resources about volunteer opportunities," Brenda explained. Then turning to Jessica with a smile that seemed only slightly forced, she added, "When I heard you were presenting today, I thought I'd stop in and say hello." Jessica recovered quickly from her surprise. "It's nice to see you again, Mrs. Whitfield." "Please call me Brenda," she replied. Then glancing around at the others in the room who were watching this interaction with curiosity, she added, "Jessica and I met on William's flight from Boston. We had quite the conversation." Jessica caught the subtle revision of history and played along. "We did indeed." Brenda moved closer, lowering her voice slightly. "I actually have a question for you, if you don't mind. Do you know any good real estate firms that might offer refresher courses? William mentioned you had some suggestions." "Of course," Jessica replied, genuinely pleased by this development. "I'd be happy to connect you with a few contacts." As they exchanged contact information, Jessica couldn't help marveling at how differently this interaction felt from their first meeting, just 3 days ago. The tension and assumptions had been replaced by something resembling mutual respect. Tentative, perhaps, but real. The meeting resumed shortly after, with Brenda slipping quietly into a chair at the back of the room. Jessica continued her presentation, aware of Brenda watching her with what seemed like genuine interest. When Jessica concluded and opened the floor for final questions, she was surprised when Brenda raised her hand. "I'm just observing," Brenda prefaced, "but I wondered if your patient engagement strategies address the older demographic. Many of William's cardiac patients are in their 70s and 80s, and they're often intimidated by digital platforms." It was a good question, one that showed Brenda had been paying attention and thinking critically about the presentation. Jessica addressed it thoroughly,